The lecture I have planned today will not take up the whole period. So when I'm through with the lecture, I do plan to review for the final. And again, what I'll probably do is cut the camera off when I review. The reason for that being, I'm going to give you folks special favor. Now, I will say this. There are some review questions that are on this morning's lecture. And it's, when you go to the video, you'll see final exam review on the this morning, and it's already there. That's what it is. The stuff that I'm about to give today, I won't have time to put that on the video this afternoon, but I will have it on tomorrow morning sometime. Okay. All right, we'll move on. The Black Death had some positive benefits. A lot of persons credit the Black Death with being the thing that made Europeans more aggressive and it made them less fearful of death because they saw death. Every European saw a lot of death anyway, and it made them just less afraid of it. And also, wages rose. Now, the kings tried to stop the rising of wages because, I mean, let's face it, the money for wages come from the coffers of the rich. And it means the rich get to keep less, and while the poor are getting more. And a lot of kings tried to stop this, but they were not really successful. I want to say this. We had, when I was a little bit older than you are now, we had a president who had the ability, or was given the power to control wages and prices. The president's name was Richard Nixon. He called a 90-day wage price freeze, but it created some problems in that wages are prices, and prices are wages, et cetera, et cetera. And it was something that no president has ever done since. And of course, you all may know Richard Nixon was disgraced later for something else. But when they gave him that power, they gave him the power in 1970, and Richard Nixon said, "I'll never do that." Then in 1971, he tried a wage price freeze. Very, very difficult thing to do. Again, with a price freeze, that means wages can't go up. With a wage freeze, okay. Let me explain. Supposing in 1911, the United States had said the price of cars shall be $900 per car. Guess what? We'd still be going outside of our cars in thunderstormy weather to crank those things up to get them started. Because in 1911, that was the first year that Cadillac installed an electric starter in its car. Now, do any of you know what I'm talking about? The old-fashioned, really old crank cars. You get out and you just set the magneto and turn the ignition switch on, get out and crank up, and after a while the engine would start. And if something went wrong, misfired, you could break your arm. My dad said you see a lot more people going around with cast on their arms in those days than you do today. But anyway, at one time you actually, but the point I'm making is inflation is sometimes necessary because as cars get better, the price has to go up. Now there are exceptions, like this computer I'm carrying now is a cheap one. It would have cost maybe $15,000 12 years ago. Today they sell about $300. Really cheap. What I'm saying is the quality goes up while the price goes down. That's been true with computers. That's true to some extent with your cell phones. But it isn't true with automobiles. As the quality of automobiles goes up, the price goes up too. As the quality of medicine goes up, believe me, the price goes up too. Medicine today is I'm not just talking about medicine, I'm talking about the medical profession. Today's medicine is much, much, much better than it was in 1960. But it is not cheap. 1960s medicine, you could visit a doctor for $5. Leave that. But anyway, the point I'm making is wages and prices are difficult for the government to regulate, and maybe, really, actually, I think the government should not regulate. What are you starting to say?
I asked what year did you go with $5?
In 1964, 65, that time period, 1959, Harry Truman tried to get a health care measure passed where everybody would have free health care through the government. If he would have done it, our country would now be, either would be bankrupt or we'd still be using 1960s medicine here in 2018. And folk, I would not want that. Hopefully you would not want either. I mean, we thought we could perform miracles back then, but a lot of what we thought was right then is proven to be wrong today. As for instance, the doctors know, they said, drink milk, drink lots of milk, drink milk. Today's doctors would say, hey, taper off on milk a little bit. A few other things that they believed back then that we don't believe anymore. All right. Now, 100 Years' War. Essentially, what happened? There are several reasons, but I'm only going to name one for the reason of the 100 Years' War. One is the King of England thought he had the right to the throne of France. Essentially, ever since the days of Henry II in the early 1100s, the kings of England had held a lot of French territory, and there had been marriages between the royal family of England and the royal family of France. Well, in the early 1300s, the throne of France became vacant. Essentially, it was Philip the Fair, Philip IV, died, and when he died, he had 3 sons. These 3 sons ruled for 18 years. And the first one got the throne first because he was the oldest. He lasted about 6 years. Then the second one got the throne. He lasted some 6 years or so. They gave the throne then to the third one. To make a long story short, all 3 of these young men died young and died without heirs. Supposedly the Knights Templar put a curse on that line. But anyway, the third and last of King Philip's children had died without heirs. So the people of France decided to give the throne to some cousin who was related to the royal family. The King of England said, I'm as closely related as he is, I should have the throne. The people of France would let him have it, so the King of England went to war, King Edward III. This war was to last off and on for 100 years. Hence it gets the name 100 Years' War. Now, France had, now keep this in mind, this is going to be a big part of the story. France had a population that was 4 times bigger than the population of England. Then the question was, why did not France easily defeat England? The answer is the French people were not united. They did not have the desire to fight, didn't really have the will to fight. They needed someone to come along and light a fire underneath them. Well, there were at least 2 periods of 20 years where there was no fighting. But for the most part, they were fighting off and on during this 100-year time. Now, the 100 Years' War was destined to change warfare. Here was a big change. Number one, knights in armor played less of a role, owing to 3 inventions. The invention of the cannon, the longbow, and the crossbow. All 3 of these inventions could pierce a knight's shield and his armor, go through both shield and armor. We talked about the longbow the other day and the crossbow. The crossbow could really hurl an arrow. Well, the crossbow not only could hurl an arrow hard, it was accurate. It had an accurate aim to it. Again, I've seen crossbows fired. I never fired one, but I've seen it done. And of course, as a kid, we'd cut off branches and trees and make our own arrows and get a string and make a bow with it. And we tried making a longbow one time. Anyway, the longbow, but now the cannon. The Chinese had invented gunpowder. They'd given that invention to the Mongolians who used it against them. But the Chinese and Mongolians at that time were mostly throwing the gunpowder in some kind of a container, something like you might call a hand grenade. It was effective. I mean, they'd throw it, it would blow up, and it would do a lot of damage to a person. But Europeans made the cannon, and these cannon would shoot farther than any bow could. And of course, when a cannonball hit a knight, it would do a lot of damage to a knight. Now, what the knights did, they put on more armor, but the longbowmen got longer longbows, better crossbows, and better cannon. And after a while, the armor became so heavy that if a knight fell down, it took 5 men to lift him up. And a lot of your knights died waiting for someone to come and pick them up. They suffocated inside their armor. Particularly if a knight's horse got hurt and fell down, if a knight slipped in the mud, I mean, probably the horse slipped in the mud and fell, there was no way for that knight to get back up without quite a bit of help. It took 5 men to help him up. And most knights who fell down, or if their horse fell, died inside their armor. That is why today we don't use armor anymore. Now, I am aware that some of our soldiers in Iraq have found, I mean, that there's been some armor developed that is not made of metal that will stop a lot of bullets, rifle bullets in particular. Nothing will stop a piece of heavy artillery. But some of our soldiers go in the battlefield armed, and but they're not using the type of armor that was used back then. Now, another thing, the foot soldier became important owing to the pikeman. What is a pike? A pike was like a spear, except its point what this meant was that a pikeman could thrust. If the thrust didn't get his enemy, he could move his spear over a little bit and pull back, and his back stroke would get the enemy. So he could get the enemy 2 ways, either with his thrust or, and also your pikemen lined up like shoulder to shoulder, and that even terrified the knights in armor because they were afraid of the pikemen. The pikemen, you get a team of them thrusting a big enough pike, and they could make a big dent in the shield or a big dent in the knight's armor. So the foot soldier then became more and more important. Basically, your nobility were no longer dominating the battlefield. Common people, people of low birth, people who were serfs, could kill a lord, could kill a knight, and very often did. Gunpowder is the one weapon, though, that was believed to have done more than anything else to destroy the armored knight. All right. There are a couple of battles, well, actually, 2 battles that there were a lot alike. I'll just mention one of them, the Battle of Crécy. At the Battle of Crécy, the French did not have a real battle plan. They thought, we outnumber them, we'll take care of them. So the French knights on horseback galloped straight toward the English, which is a mistake. For one thing, there was a heavy rain falling that day, and a lot of the horses slipped in the mud. But in addition, these knights whose horses did not slip and fall in the mud ran into a heavy hail of arrows, but the arrows were not like the old type of arrows. These arrows had a lot of power to them, and a lot of them had been fired from crossbows. And it turned out these arrows could penetrate armored knights' armor as well as penetrate the shields. And a lot of knights died inside their armor after they'd been hit by an arrow. Of course, once the arrow penetrated the armor and went into the knight's body, there was nothing the knight could do to get it out. And it would be difficult even for the doctors to get it out, owing to the fact they have to first remove the armor, and that would be difficult to do while the knight was still alive. Quite difficult to say the least. As for horses, you may know And if a horse falls down and breaks its leg, there's nothing you do but finish the horse off. They cannot walk on 3 legs. Unlike your dog or cat, that can trot around on 3 legs, your horse cannot. Now, there have been a few exceptions to that made. Some horses today have survived a broken leg, but for the most part, when a horse breaks its leg, all you can do is finish him off. And that's all they could do back then, especially. Anyway, the Battle of Crécy, which should have been an easy French victory, was an English victory. They gave the English more confidence. All right, now we get to a part of the story that has a different turn to it. These were 2 back-to-back kings of France, both of them named Charles. The war had been going on for a good many years. Now, actually, there were 3 kings that rode in charge: Charles V, 6, and 7. Charles V was a strong warrior king, fought against the English, won several battles, but could not drive the English out of his country. Then came Charles VI. Now, I started to warn you. The rest of this story, folk, is going to involve some things that do not have a good natural explanation. I'm going to give it to you in raw format. That is, I'm not going to try to explain what happened. It's just this is the way that they told the story. The way they told it is the way I'm going to tell it, without any explanation or any apologies for the way I'm presenting it. In other words, if you hear anything that you think is paranormal, that's part of the story. Right? What I'm getting to is Joan of Arc. If any of you heard about Joan of Arc. Yeah, okay. Basically, all right. Anyway, Charles VI went on a hunting trip one day, and while he was hunting, some naked man came out of the woods, ran straight for the king. Before I could say, he touched the person of the king, and the king went insane. The king, the man who went and fled back into the woods. I don't know if they ever caught him or not. As for the king, he was to spend the last 30 years of his life in and out of insanity. One point he went 2 whole years without having any kind of an insane fit, but then he'd go back into it, sane, insane. The people that day, they called in doctors, they called in exorcists, they called in priests, they even called in witches, all in an attempt to get the king restored to normal health. Nothing they did worked. The king remained insane, like I say, off and on for some 30 years. Now, 20 years before he died, Charles VI made out a will in which he willed that when he died, his throne would go to the King of England. When that was done, the King of England stopped fighting. So for 20 years, there was no fighting. The war was at a lull, and everybody waited for Charles VI to die. But about the time that Charles VI said this, that Charles VI willed his throne to the King of England, Charles VI's wife had a son. Now, if you notice the way I worded that, the Queen had a son, and we don't know who the father was. Not for sure. Now, of course, most people thought that Charles VI was the father because, after all, he was married to the Queen. But then the Queen told a few people that her husband was impotent. If you know anything about impotence, impotence can be intermittent. A man might be impotent one week and not so the next. So that's not the final word. In other words, Charles VI might be the father of Charles VII, and he might not. Again, someday they might dig up the bodies and what's left of them and do a DNA test and determine whether Charles VII is really the father of, whether it's really the son of Charles VI or not. Now, something else to remind you about wills. This can become really controversial, and some of you will run into this during your lifetime. You haven't run into it already. When a will is made out, the mental condition of the person who makes it is always of extreme importance. Therefore, Charles VI's will was made while he was known to be in and out of insanity. With that in mind, when Charles VI died, the King of England said, the throne is mine, he gave it to me. The people of France said, no, he was not of sound mind. We know he was in and out of insanity. He did not know what he was doing. We're going to give the throne to his son, Charles VII. Anyway, the people of France put Charles VII on the throne, so England went back to war. And it appeared at first that the English were winning. In fact, it looked like the English would win because Charles VII was his own worst enemy. He didn't even have himself crowned because he didn't feel confident enough. Number one, he did not know who his father really was. He doubted whether he had a real right to the throne or not. And at one point it was said he even appeared in public with a patched garment, which was something a king should not do. I mean, they just expect the king to dress in fine royal robes and not appear in patched clothes. That was something only the poor people did. And this became a scandal throughout France, by the way. The king appeared in public in a patched robe. Oh my, how awful. All right. Charles VII had trouble coming to firm decisions. And the English were winning. He didn't quite have the army to defeat them. Things were looking really bad for France, except on the edge of the border of France, a young 10-year-old girl was praying earnestly. Her name was Joanne, of the d'Arc family, Joanne d'Arc, or Joan of Arc. Oh Lord, save France. Now, Joanne started to hear voices when she was still quite young. She only lived 21 years. But when she was a teenager, she started hearing voices. And the voices told her, go see the king. Ask him to give you an army. You can defeat the English. She claimed the voices came from Michael the Archangel and two saints who had been dead for a good many years, Saint Margaret and Saint Catherine, who had lived more than 1,000 years before. You don't hear much about these saints today, but in those days they were fairly prominent saints. But she claimed that between Michael the Archangel and these three saints, she was to get an army and go and defeat the English. Well, she finally went to the court of Sir Robert. Now picture this young peasant girl. I mean, peasant means farmer who doesn't have any land. Like basically a farmer, her father had to pay rent, but never owned the property he was farming. They didn't have 30-year mortgages in those days. So she went to Sir Robert Beaumains, the local nobleman. Now, it's not uncommon for a peasant girl to go to a nobleman. Young women often went to the nobleman to discuss their problems or ask the nobleman for some help, or could you give me a plot of land to graze my sheep on, or my father's sheep on, or could you loan me this or that? But she went into Sir Robert in front of the whole court and asked Sir Robert to send her to the King of France so that she could lead an army to defeat the English. Obviously, she was laughed out of court. Her father was deeply embarrassed. Her father gave her a sound whipping, and for a time Joanne settled down and she didn't hear the voices anymore. That didn't last too long, though. Her voices came back to her. So she went back to Sir Robert, and folk, here is a part of the story that we don't fully understand. Somehow, she persuaded Sir Robert to send an escort to escort her to the king. We don't know the details, but there was something that she said. In a few minutes, I'm going to give you something that some people suspected, but she actually got Sir Robert to listen to her. Of course, about this time, too, the word that some young peasant girl was claiming that she could lead the French to victory was spreading all over the realm. Anyway, Robert got some of his crack troops together. In those days, all the nobles had troops. He got his crack troops and told them, now, hide in the daytime, and travel at night toward the king's palace. To this day, if you visit eastern France, there are people who will tell you, my ancestor hid Joan of Arc away in my house in their house in the daytime. Joanne went through my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather's house. I mean, the people in France today are still proud that Joanne hid away in the daytime, and then she'd travel at night. The English started looking for her, never found her. She got to the castle where the king was staying. Now, again, let me warn you, folk. I'm not going to try to explain what happened, folk. It did. On her way to the castle, she got to the castle gate, and one of the guards, maybe this time all of France knew she was on the way. The English did too. Got the castle gate, and one of the guards made fun of her, and she said to him, you need to watch what you're doing, for your death is near. That guard was dead within an hour. Folk, check it out for yourself. It's in the records. Well, she went inside the castle. The king, upon hearing she was coming, the king looked around the room and found a lackey who said to the lackey, here, come here. He and the lackey stepped in an adjacent room and traded clothes. The lackey put on the king's royal robe and a crown and got the scepter, and the king dressed in lackey clothes. So the lackey then went out of the room, and of course everybody recognized the lackey was lackey. The lackey sat on the king's throne with a crown on his head and the royal robes and royal scepter. And the king stood on the edge of the wall with a tray in his hand like he was ready to serve. Everybody recognized the king very well. But they were going to make a dunce out of this peasant girl. Joanne entered the room, having supposedly never seen the king before. She ignored the lackey who was sitting on the throne, impersonating the king. She went straight to Charles VII and bowed down and did obeisance, and Charles VII genuinely, what are you honoring me for? She said, you are the Dauphine. And if any of you know about French history, Dauphine was the word for crown prince. Joanne refused to call him anything but Dauphine because he had not been crowned. Until he had been crowned, she only called him the Dauphine. Sometimes this word is pronounced Dauphin, but she would not call him king. She gave him the respect that she thought he deserved. He was Dauphine. Well, all the French court could do was applaud. Now, folks, by way of reminder, I want to remind you,